Welcome everyone back to Tales from the 90s. This is the podcast where I go back to my favorite time period and talk about just all the stuff going on then, some stuff with my personal life, and whatever else I feel like talking about. I pick a random month and a random year of the 90s and we go back to it. This week we're on episode number 37 and we are going back to November of 1991. So let's go. Alright, before we get fully into this video, I'll just talk about it at the top of the thing. There's been a few comments I've seen where it says, lower your microphone, we can't see your face and stuff. I do it for a reason, okay? I got freaking teeth issues in the front, a little self-conscious. There, I said it. I'm not a meth head. But anyway, that's why that's there. Just stupid front tooth problems. It's not important. I just felt like saying it because a few people have commented, and that's the reason why. I mean, you don't need to see any more of my face anyway. Anyway, we're going to the 90s. But before we get there, I do want to mention, yesterday I dropped my bonus episode. It's literally just called All About Restaurants. So it's an hour and 50 minutes. I didn't even mean to talk that long. I just got rambling. It's a few different lists on there of restaurants that are ranked, like sit-down restaurants, local restaurants, fast food, chicken places, stuff like that. And then I give my favorite thing that I like to order at each place. Like if I had to just pick one thing, I would, that's what I would order. Talk about some funny memories and some bad memories. Don't go to the Golden Blossom in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Anyway, and then I do a top 10 overall of my favorite, just all restaurants. But anyway, that's the bonus episode. Literally just came out yesterday. Well, it came out today, but I'm recording this the day before this comes out. But I do a bonus episode once a month. Don't know what August is going to be, so you guys let me know. Talk about anything. It could be a top 50, a top something, a countdown of something, a certain subject to talk about. It don't have to even be within the 90s. That's why it's a bonus episode. But if it is, it'd probably be better. But like literally anything. Obviously not Christmas or anything because I saved that for that time of year. Halloween last year was my first bonus episode. I did the top 50 horror movies. I think this year I might do something, my favorite anthology series. Won't be hard to tell what's number one on that. But anyway, that's for then. Let me know if you got any suggestions for August. I've always got videos coming out on here, different kinds. I did have a special request. By the way, I don't know if you're listening here on Spotify or if you're watching on YouTube. I also got a Facebook if you're not watching there. I got a Facebook page, and I got a message on there and from someone. He wanted me to do a pay-per-view review of the 1991 Royal Rumble, which is the first pay-per-view he saw that really got him into WWE, well, WWF at the time. So I said I'd review it and give a grade like A to F on it. I've never done a pay-per-view review before, and it won't be anything fancy. Like, we won't have videos and stuff because I don't want to get the stuff blocked, and I don't have the capability to download off of Peacock. I may figure out how to do that someday. So it's not going to be like you see, I can't think of it. Brian Zane, I can't think of the channel off the top of my head. Wrestling with Regret. I watch it all the time, I couldn't think of it, but it won't be anything near that production level. But it'll just be, I'll watch the pay-per-view, I'll take some notes, and give my thoughts on it and everything, because I have seen it once, but it's been a really long time ago. But anyway, enough with all that. Sorry I get all that stuff in the beginning. Let's get into the actual episode. We're going back to November of 1991, and again, this is episode 37. So I've been doing it this long. Can't believe that. Almost getting close to a full year's worth of episodes. But here we just talk about whatever I can think about to talk about. I have categories and stuff, of course. That's why I keep looking over to the side. I have notes, but I try to give my own personal takes on the things, not just facts and stuff. That's kind of boring. And if you're looking for that type of podcast, that's out there. Mine is half facts, half thoughts. Some things I don't even remember, so I don't even talk that much about it. But anyway, we're going to talk about some kids' meals toys. Of course, everybody knows kids' meals, as they call them, Happy Meals, whether they're from McDonald's or not. So we'll start there. But these are toys that came out during this month, or around this month, if the facts are kind of off. But with McDonald's, they came out with Super Looney Tunes. These were Looney Tune characters with like snap-on superhero costumes. So you had Petunia Pig was like Wonder Pig. Super Bugs, you can guess who he was. Bat Duck, you can guess there. And Taz Flash. And then, of course, with the kids' toys, they normally had a toy that was for 3 and under. That way there wasn't any parts to it, nothing they can take off and choke on. They had the Bat Duck character, but he was on a car, and it was all in like one piece, and then, nothing came off of it. So they always had those for the little kids. That's pretty cool. Superhero and Looney Tune crossover there. Wendy's had the Wacky Wind-Ups. These were wind-up toys that featured different food products there, kid version, of course. They got burger, fries, Frosty, a meal box, and a potato. Because, baked potato, you can get baked potatoes at Wendy's. The 3 and under toy was a kid's meal, kind of like the box, but it didn't wind up, so that way there's no little pieces to break off. Burger King had Inspector Gadget toys. Now, I love Inspector Gadget, one of my favorite cartoons of all time. Speaking of bonus episodes, it was on my top 50 Nickelodeon shows and my top 50 Saturday morning cartoons / kids TV. So it made both lists on that one. Sorry, I'm a frog in my throat, as always. But anyway, that's Burger King Inspector Gadget. They had different versions of like the gadget, like a scuba diving Inspector Gadget. They had when Inspector Gadget had the helicopter come out of the top of his head, they had that. Windsurfing gadget, and an Inspector Gadget with like an inflated jacket, although it wasn't actually full of air, it was just hard plastic. But KFC actually had some toys at this time too. Pizza Hut also did toys as well. I just don't have the info for them. For the KFC and Taco Bell and Pizza Hut, they had kids' toys at various times, but the info I can find online is very sparse on that. But I did find KFC had Alvin and the Chipmunks toys. It was a set of 7 figures, and also had the Alvin the Chipmunks and the Chipettes. So it was, of course, based on that 80s Nickelodeon and Saturday morning TV Chipmunks cartoon, which, of course, made both my lists too. So, and I actually found a lot of these toys were for sale on eBay. Like, you can actually buy these toys, and they weren't even that expensive. Like, I was expecting some of this stuff to be high in price, but it wasn't. So, if you like to collect those type of things, and you can find all that stuff on eBay. Some of it's even still in its original bags, which is pretty cool. Some news is kind of, whenever I talk about news, it's normally not like happy news. It's kind of not controversial, but I guess in this case it kind of was. A couple things going on in the world. It was the early 90s, so that was the time that the AIDS epidemic really hit. Of course, it wasn't the first time there was AIDS, but it was the first time it was really talked about on the mainstream media, like the news, that type of stuff. Magic Johnson revealed he had AIDS and retired from the NBA, and the same month Freddie Mercury announced that he has AIDS. The lead singer of Queen, as if people didn't know that. He announced he had AIDS, and then he died the next day. So there was a lot of fear and everything going on, and they actually in New York City were passing out condoms to high schoolers, and of course that's still a little controversial these days, but especially then that was like highly controversial. But then this epidemic was running crazy, and I'm not here to debate one way or the other, blah blah blah, that type of stuff. It's just that was how big that thing was. That it was. But like I said, it existed before that, obviously, but especially in 1991, and then both those events happened in November. It really got people worried about it, and I mean, you should be. But anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on the stuff like that because I try to make this more nostalgic, and I'm not gonna go back and look up. I could do a whole podcast probably looking, tragedies and beatings and police brutality and all that type of stuff and unsolved murders, all that type of stuff. There's podcasts for everything out there pretty much these days. I guarantee I'm not the only 90s podcast out there. I haven't looked, but I could probably find like 30 of them. But anyway, we're going to talk about some TV now. Try to lighten it up a little bit. There was a show that debuted around this time that I remember watching a little bit. I never remembered the name. It was called Hot Country Nights. It was on NBC. Only lasted 12 episodes, but Dick Clark was one of the creators on it because of the huge boom that was happening in country music. Of course, if you've watched this podcast for any length of time or seen my Tales from the Albums series where I talk about my favorite albums, I started with Randy Travis's Storms of Life. But my type of music. So I was huge into that. Country had been on a huge boom. It started in the 80s with Randy Travis and Keith Whitley, and then the class of 89, as they called them, which would become, the mega stars of 1990. Alan Jackson, Travis Tritt, Garth Brooks, Clint Black. There's a few other names in there too, but those are the main ones that are talked about as being the huge stars. So by late 1991, country was huge at the time. And of course, the next year was Billy Ray Cyrus with Achy Breaky Heart, which I know people that they seem to be on the fence of that. They either really like the song or really hate it. I really like it, I don't think it's like great masterpiece of music. It's just fun, and a lot of people took that as like the death of country music if they could only see the music now. But anyway, that would be take country even further, and it was just the stuff that they were, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those artists because some of the when I get to music later on, some of the number ones and the albums that came out had to do with that. But country music was becoming huge back in the 90s. Before that, it just been like a joke to the mainstream. The people that loved it, it was never a joke, and it was still a little bit of a joke, but it was like, it was becoming acceptable, and it was all led at the forefront by Garth Brooks, of course, and that's not just me because he's my favorite of all time, but that special he did, which would actually come out in January, 2 months after this, This Is Garth Brooks on NBC, really put country in a different light, and it was just like, I mean, they even had country music at the halftime show in the Super Bowl in the 90s. It was how big it was. So, and it was all good music to me too. It wasn't all pop crossover I can't even talk crap. The only one you could possibly say was crossover was Garth Brooks, and that it wasn't like his music was crossover. It was just he had a rock presentation, and he became so popular that people thought he was almost like a pop artist. And then, not to get off on a tangent here, but in the late 90s when he comes out with the Chris Gaines character, which was supposed to be the CD he did was a soundtrack. It was supposed to be to a movie. The movie never came out. It's a damn frog in my throat. But people thought he was trying to cross over into pop. He'd already crossed over into pop years ago. He didn't need to create a different character for that. He was popular on his own. He was trying to make a movie. He wasn't even trying to make a statement. He was just making music for a movie. And the music's good, by the way, if you listen to it. Anyway, that's 1999. I'm getting off here. A couple of shows that ended that year, because we're on TV still. I know I was talking about music, but it was that Hot Country Nights show. Muppet Babies. Had to do it. That's the rule on here. I gotta sing this stupid theme song. Well, it's not stupid, but it's stupid when I sing it. But anyway, Muppet Babies ended after 8 seasons on CBS. The final episode was about an amusement park where they were going to go. They were building an amusement park, but then the Muppet Babies decided, of course, as they did on every episode, to just imagine everything. But anyway, Muppet Babies of course, had been on Saturday morning cartoons. I'd first discovered it on Nickelodeon when it was in reruns after this. And then, of course, I'd see it on Saturday morning cartoon reruns, but I caught it in reruns and it on Nickelodeon and just loved that cartoon. Another one that ended that I really loved was on Nickelodeon. It was Eureeka's Castle. They had 3 seasons on Nickelodeon. They were, of course, part of the Nick Jr. block, but it was about the magic music box that would wind up, and Eureka's music box, well, castle, is a castle in a music box, but and then all the characters in there. Magellan the Dragon, of course, one of the favorites. Batley the Bat. The Moat Twins, they're always fighting with each other. The 3 Singing Fish. Love that show. Of course, it ended there, and then one of the facts that I still find crazy every time I think about it, now that I know it, I can't stop thinking about it, is one of the creators on it was R.L. Stine, of course, of Goosebumps fame. Of course, 1991, Goosebumps is still, a year or 2 from coming out. Or is it? No, I think they came out in 92, so they were about to come out with Goosebumps. And R.L. Stine would be a household name. But video games, not much to talk about except the best-selling game of the month for all systems was, for the Sega Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog. Of course, the very first one, classic. I've told the story before. I can't actually play this game anymore because I've got some kind of like motion sickness to where, I don't know, it's that type of, like I can play the Mario games, but it's the Sonic games of how fast you go that I can't play that. But I can play the Sonic Adventure game because it's, the 3D. But something about the side-scrolling, old-school, 16, 32-bit, well, 16 for Genesis, games, I don't know. Some kind of motion sickness, but still, Sonic the Hedgehog is one of the greatest games of all time. And of course, everybody remembers at that time the video game war was on. Nintendo came out of the box, a brief history of the video games. Of course, Atari and all those games were popular in the 70s and the early 80s. And then they had the, I forget exactly the term they used for it. It's like a video game bust or something, or where, like, I guess because of all the cheap games they came out with, like, they had Pong, but they had like 60,000 versions of that just basic ball bouncing back and forth thing, and just the market got so oversaturated that it just like blew up basically. Nintendo took a risk, which of course was known as Famicom in Japan, the Nintendo Famicom system. But they came out in the mid 80s and really brought video games back. So and then of course they had the Sega, the Master System, and then they came out with the Sega Genesis, and it beat the Super Nintendo to the market. It was the first 16-bit system, and with Sonic the Hedgehog, they just blew things away. So Nintendo got the Super Nintendo out, and from that point it was on. You'd see commercials where Sega does what Nintendo was it. I can't remember exactly how the saying went, but it was just basically Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo arguing back and forth which one's the better one, and it was really kind of hard to pick one. I never even had either when they were both out, in the current system. I've talked about before. I got the original Nintendo. I think 1992, the year after this podcast. Because, my mom couldn't afford the Super Nintendo because those things were expensive even then. You talk about, you think about PlayStation 5 and Xbox, whatever the latest one is, I can't keep up with them. They go from 360 to One and X, and I don't know. I can't figure out their math equations. But anyway, these were expensive systems. So my first experience playing Super Nintendo was at my granny's house. It was my cousin's. I never even got a Super Nintendo until I was like 21 years old and bought it at a CD Game Exchange at Norwood. Bought it used and some games with it. Ended up selling it for wrestling tickets, which I wish I would have kept the Super Nintendo, even though the wrestling, the going to Raw was fun. But and I got a Sega Genesis when I was for my 15th birthday, It was the Sega Genesis 3, which was a more streamlined version of it. I mean, it played just like the Sega Genesis, but it had the 6-button controller. Because when the Genesis originally came out, it had the 3 buttons, but when they came out with the 6-button version later on. And anyway, I bought a bunch of used games for that, but I've played them both, and I can't really pick my favorite. There's just so many classics. Of course, the two you're automatically going to think of is Sonic the Hedgehog and the Mario Brothers. Super Mario World came out, especially Super Mario World that was bundled with Mario 1, 2, and 3 and the Lost Levels all on that one cartridge. That is, you can't beat that. That might be the greatest single game, release ever, is that one. But, of course, one of the big differences was when the first Mortal Kombat came out, another huge game changer, that game. And when it was released on Sega Genesis, it had all the fatalities and the blood, but they released it for Super Nintendo, which was more kid-friendly, and they cut out those fatalities and the blood, and people were mad. They're like, they heard about this game, Mortal Kombat, and their parents get it for them, and it's like, I thought it was like this bloody thing. They're not even blood. So by the time they came out with the second one, because sales were so poor after it had been discovered it wasn't the same full game you're getting on Genesis, for Mortal Kombat 2, they released the full one for Super Nintendo, but they put a warning on it so that way they're covered, but they weren't going to make that same mistake twice. And of course, you got your all kinds of different classic games for each system. Like I said, I couldn't pick my favorite of both. I probably had more experience playing the Sega Genesis, like I said, but I mean, if you asked me to pick one, I really couldn't. One of my favorite games of both systems, that Mario one, but also Sonic Spinball. Love that freaking game. I discovered that. I bought it used at this video store, and they still had Sega Genesis games in 1999 or early 2000, one of the two. But somehow they still had Sega Genesis games for sale there, I guess from the old inventory. But I found Tin Head for Sega Genesis, which I love that game. It's a platformer, sort of like a Mario type thing. It's sort of like a Sonic 2. Not Sonic 2 is in the number 2, but Sonic also. But it's not as fast paced, so it don't give me the headache. But that game's fun. But I discovered Sonic Spinball, which is just like a pinball game. But I loved it so much, I've actually bought the digital version on Amazon, I don't even know how long ago, 15 years ago. It's still on my computer. Never beat that game, and I want to. But of course, Mario and the Sonic franchises, it's hard to... I really wish they'd come out with a way to put them in a game together. Now, I know they have the Olympic games, but that don't really count. I mean, that's and those games are never really fun to me, the Mario versus Sonic Olympic games. I don't know, it's just something about them, I know I'm talking about Wii now, but when they came out with the Super Mario All-Stars sports game, where they had tennis and all that for the Wii, that game was fun. They should have made the Mario and Sonic Olympic games like that. They were just too hard to play. Anyway, I'm talking about late 2000 stuff. I'm going to get back to the 90s. We're going to go back and we're going to talk about some sports. Of course, being November, we're in week 14 at the end of this month, which is, only a month left in the season. The leaders for the AFC were the Bills, the Oilers, which, of course, are now the Tennessee Titans, and Houston has its own team with the Texans. But the Bills are the Oilers, Broncos, and Raiders. And the NFC leaders were the Redskins, Bears, yes, Redskins, they weren't Commanders then, Redskins, Bears, Lions, and Saints. And I'm giving 4 from each because 2 were tied. This is a time when there was only 3 divisions. There was the Eastern, the Central, and the Western. Now they have the North, South, East, and West, but back then it was just 3. And my favorite team, the Bengals, we were the worst team in the Central at 2-11. The Colts were 1-12, so combined between the Bengals and the Colts, which, sometimes the fan bases overlap there, especially where I live here in southern Indiana. It's it's a crapshoot whether someone's going to be a Bengals fan or a Colts fan. You never know. But those teams were horrible at that time. This was pre-Peyton Manning. Obviously, this is pre-Joe Burrow Bengals, of course. I mean, that wouldn't come for another, 20 years? Man. And the Bengals in the 90s were the absolute dog crap. I mean, horrible team. But anyway, the Super Bowl that would come 2 months after this, the Redskins would beat the Bills in the Super Bowl in January. Of course, that was part of that Bills legendary, or infamous, I should say, run where they lost 4 Super Bowls in a row. Don't know if that'll ever be duplicated. Don't think anybody wants to. But NASCAR was winding up their season. Davey Allison won the Pyro 500 at Phoenix, and Mark Martin won the final race of the year, a Hardee's 500. The old Hardee's, the good Hardee's, not crappy crap owned by Carl's Jr. now. If you want to see my rant about that, check out the bonus episode all about restaurants. Anyway, Mark Martin won when he was the Valvoline car, before the Viagra car, won the Hardee's 500 at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And but the champion that year, because they go on points and stuff, they don't have like a final race. Well, I don't know, they might now. I can't keep up with all the rules changing in NASCAR. I'm trying to watch it and trying to follow along. It's just, they got a tournament in the middle of the season that has nothing to do with the championship, or maybe it does, I don't know. Anyway, Dale Earnhardt won the title that year. It was his 5th, and of course he would go on to win 7. And another sports note, the game, as they call it in college, my favorite team, Ohio State. Michigan beat Ohio State 31-3. 31-3. Let's move on. I don't want to talk about that anymore. Still national champions this last year. If I can step out of the 90s for a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about music. Of course, I'll go into the Billboard Hot 100. I wasn't listening to pop music at the time, but I still give the countdown just for keeping the record on here. Song called Romantic by Karen White. Never heard of the song or the artist. Literally never heard of it until I looked up the charts. Cream by Prince and the New Power Revolution was #1 for 2 weeks. I don't want to even think about what what the song's talking about. With Prince, you never know. One song I did know, When a Man Loves a Woman, Michael Bolton, off his Time, Love, and Tenderness album. And I know that because it was one of my mom's favorite albums. My dad actually took her to see Michael Bolton during a brief time where they were trying to get back together, and took her to see the concert in Cincinnati. And during the mid to late 90s, during the Marky Fo, the Evil Stepdad days, she had that tape, and we would listen to it, and she would like work out during the summer, and I'd work out with her, doing lay on the floor and kick the legs back and your arms out, and just like aerobic type exercises. But it was fun. Well, I did basically the whole summer. I think she did it at like noon, and that was one of the tapes she always listened to, and I ended up just loving that album. I think my favorite song on it is Steel Bars, but When a Man Loves a Woman is definitely a great song. Of course, it's a remake, but it's my favorite version of the song is his. And then a song by PM Dawn, never heard of it, called Set Adrift on Memory Bliss. And I've only heard of that song because I think it was Backstreet Boys that covered that, and it was like one of the songs that I skipped. I just didn't like it. I think it's on their original, their self-titled debut, or I don't know, that with the Backstreet Boys, they had like an album out that came out in the UK, and then they had one here, and so I don't know, but the US debut, the title album, or the self-titled album, anyway, I just know it as a song that I didn't like on there and skipped, so I probably wouldn't have liked the original version. Moving on to my countdown, the American Country Countdown, some of those artists of the class of '89, and some of these songs that were #1 just this month alone in 1991 were like monumental career songs that could have been Song of the Year. And I don't know what the Song of the Year for '91 is. By the way, when I get done with a full year's worth of these episodes, all 12 months, I'll do an additional 13th episode for that year, where I will do like the top songs of the year, the top TV shows of the year, the top awards for wrestling, the highest grossing movies, that type of thing. I'm saving all for one video. Anyway, let's get to this American Country Countdown. Any More by Travis Tritt was number 1 for 1 week. Plus, back in October, it was number 1. So it was 2 weeks at number 1. That song is huge. Of course, the video, everybody remembers Travis playing the Vietnam veteran that, he doesn't want to see his, I'm guessing I think it's his wife, because, he's crippled now and doesn't think that she'll love him, so he doesn't want to see her. And of course, that's a whole video series. The next song, Tell Me I Was Dreaming, was They're Together, because at the end of Any More, they leave the hospital together, the VA hospital, which that video did a lot for the VA really getting the word out that that these veterans need our help. And Travis Tritt became a huge spokesman for them. But the second song, Tell Me I Was Dreaming, his character Mac, Travis Tritt's character is named Mac. He's with the woman, and she's her name's Amy, or Annie. Or he says Annie, but I think it's Annie. I don't know his accent. I think he's saying Annie, but it's coming out Annie. I don't know why I find that funny, but anyway, she's pregnant, and they live on this dock, where he takes care of boats with. I can't think of the guy. But one of his friends that helped him out in the VA hospital, I should say he's in a wheelchair. I believe, I don't remember, I don't think his legs were amputated, they just didn't work or something. I can't remember. Anyway, they work at this place that fixes boats, and she was out on a boat cleaning one, and she was pregnant, and she slipped and fell, and immediately went to surgery, and the baby was fine, but she died. That was how that ended, of course. And then the third one to wrap up that video series was If I Lost You, which is a few years later, where Travis Tritt gets on the boat and is I can't talk at all, I swear. Why am I on a podcast? He's reliving the stuff that happened in the first 2 videos. And it turns out that the kid he had was a little girl, and they went out on a boat to basically where she was buried. And she's like, "Why do we always come out here?" And he says it's her mom lives there. Yeah, she just lives there by her tombstone, buried there. I can't speak, I swear. I've had a long day. I've been up since 6:30 in the morning. It's now 9:07 at night. 6:30 in the morning, cleaning like crap. I've been outside painting the trailer for 4 hours. I'm exhausted and I can't talk. I know, next week when I can't talk, I'll come up with another excuse, but that's all real. Anyway, back to the countdown. The next song that was number 1, and only for 1 week, which should have had a huge run, but just so many great songs, was Alan Jackson's Someday. Great heartbreak type song from his Don't Rock the Jukebox album, which is probably my favorite of his of all time. Just like Travis Tritt, Any More came off of It's All About to Change, my favorite Travis Tritt album of all time. Up next was number 1 for 2 weeks, is another favorite album of this person, and that's Garth Brooks' Shameless. There was a time in my life that this was my favorite song ever. It's not now, but it's not like I don't like it. It's just other songs, I felt have surpassed it. And sometimes if you have favorites, it's not always a song that comes after it that can take over your favorite. Sometimes it can be songs from 20 years earlier that, just sometimes your favorites can change on you, From day to day, you're like, this is my favorite song ever. No, this is my favorite song ever. But anyway, Shameless came off of his Rope in the Wind album, which was his 3rd album, which is my favorite Garth Brooks album of all time, which is kind of hard to pick because there's so many great ones. But that song was huge from him. Of course, it was a Billy Joel song that was, I think he never released it as a single. Garth told a story on the concert that one of those 10 CDs for a penny thing where you subscribe to it. You ordered it by mail, and then the hook is they send one each month until you cancel. But anyone they send, you have to send the money for. Back then, it was before subscription, so you didn't just get a card and they charge it at a certain time a month. You got the bill. A lot of people got sued for that. Maybe me twice. Well, I don't know if I got sued, but just a lot of people ripped them off. Anyway, he came in from the road one day, and there was a Billy Joel album that was there. I guess one of his current ones. And he put it in and was listening to the music because he was a huge Billy Joel fan anyway. And he heard "Shameless" and and got permission to record it, and it became a monster song. Could have been a career song for him, just like the other ones, but he's had so many great ones. And then to wind up the month was Randy Travis's "Forever Together." And by this time, it was in 1991. Randy Travis was still hot, but kind of tapering off because everybody's got a shelf life in music, unfortunately. Even the big ones, you still have sort of a shelf life. But still a really good song by Randy Travis. And that's, that is a of just classic A+ songs there. There was one album that was released in this month, and it was Tracy Lawrence's debut album, Sticks and Stones. It went platinum, which of course means it sold 1 million copies. Had 4 singles released from it. The very first single, the title track, Sticks and Stones, went to #1. So right out of the gate, #1. Today's Lonely Fool went to #3. Running Behind, #4. And Somebody Paints the Wall, #8. So, 4 top 10 singles off the debut album, including your first single ever is #1. And that's not even as big as he would get. His next album was probably one of his most successful. I know it's my favorite. It's probably going to be on Tales from the Album soon. It was called the album called Alibis. Of course, everybody remembers that song, but the album was just... There's not a bad song on that album. Like I don't skip any of those. Great album. Tracy Lawrence, one of my favorite of all time. Not talked about anywhere near as much as he should be. Great voice, great song selections. If you ever watched his videos from the 90s, not all of them, but a lot of them, he started getting like a theme to him. Like he's like sort of like a time traveler, where he like puts himself in the character of the song in the video, like going through this like time. It almost reminds me of like Quantum Leap, at the end of each episode where he, Sam figures out the what he has to do to leap, and he leaps into the next person and is gonna take over their life. That's basically what he did in these videos. It was like a concept theme, because sometimes with videos, you can't do much as far as story wise, other than you have the classic performing the song, which is nothing wrong with that. But then they really started trying in the 90s, not just there, but MTV had started with the 80s with pop music, of doing like concepts for videos, not just performances or shots of the band or the artist singing in different locations. They really tried to make like little movies out of these things, and Tracy Lawrence was one of the first ones to really make a concept behind his videos, and it really got him noticed. And country videos were something in the 90s. The channels CMT, TNN, later GAC. Loved. I was glued to those almost as much as I was to Nickelodeon. But we're going to talk a little bit about wrestling now. Of course, I said I'm going to review the 1991 Royal Rumble. I'm actually talking about the 1991 Survivor Series this week. But before we get to that, November 19th was WCW Clash of the Champions. This was their, not always monthly, sometimes bi-monthly, or even, spread apart even more than that later. But it was like a TV special on TBS. It was an in-between, because at the time there was no WCW Nitro. WCW Saturday Night was their big show. And actually, I think it was then. Yeah. But that was their big show. And of course, they would have their pay-per-views not every month during this time. No, none of the big, them or WWF had pay-per-views every month. It would just be, WWF would be 4 a year. Sometimes they'd put another one in there. But it was basically what Saturday Night's main event was to the WWF and is now. It's higher in ranking than a Raw and SmackDown, but lower than what they call now PLEs. I still call them pay-per-views. But anyway, this was the 17th Clash of Champions. It was in Savannah, Georgia. Dustin Rhodes and Ricky Steamboat won the WCW World Tag Team titles from the Enforcers, which was the team of Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko. Rick Rude defeated WCW US Champion Sting to win the title. And then in the main event, WCW World Heavyweight Champion Lex Luger retained his title, defeating Rick Steiner. And then we're going to move to November 27th to talk about the WWF Survivor Series. This came from Detroit, Michigan. And the Survivor Series was originally, and for the most part, has stayed true to the concept. Different deviations here and there. Like lately, they've been doing War Games matches, which is a WCW concept, which is basically like Survivor Series, but in a cage. But it's not eliminations. It's one pin and it's over. But traditional Survivor Series matches, if you don't know, is typically 4-on-4. There, I can't talk again. Typically a 4-on-4, although we do see a 3-on-3 as the main event. But it's two teams of 4. Sometimes it's people that have something in common. Sometimes it's just they've got the same enemies in common. Sometimes these are a lot of thrown together teams. But both teams, it works like a tag team match. One person from each team in, and a pinfall or submission, then the person's eliminated, or disqualification or count out. Sometimes they did that too. But you basically fight until there's one team is completely eliminated. Sometimes you would have the whole team survive. Sometimes you would just have one person survive. This show, we had Ric Flair, my favorite wrestler of all time, the Mountie, $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, and the Warlord. They defeated the team of Roddy Piper, Virgil, Bret the Hitman Hart, and the British Bulldog. Ric Flair was the sole survivor for his team, which means that he was the only person left on his team. The Undertaker defeated WWF champion Hulk Hogan to win the title. Now, this is a controversial one. I'll talk about the story controversy and the real controversy. The story controversy was Ric Flair got involved. He put a chair in the ring, and Undertaker did the tombstone to Hogan on it. The referee didn't see it. Well, they ended up having a rematch at the pay-per-view called this Tuesday in Texas that Hogan won the title back, but I can't remember exactly what happened, but it was another controversial finish. So WWF President Jack Tunney held the belt up and put it for the winner of the 1992 Royal Rumble, which, of course, Ric Flair would win. That's my favorite Rumble of all time, 92. But the real controversy in that one is Hogan was, it's been told a million times, Undertaker tells it on his podcast, but he's told it on other videos too, where Hogan was going on and on backstage about, protect my neck, because from the tombstone, which is, it's a pile driver, but you land with the guy's head straight down, but if you ever watch it, Undertaker clearly protects everybody. The head don't even really hit the mat, and if it does, it's after Undertaker's knees hit, so they're safe. But he's like, be careful, and Undertaker's like, I should have known something was wrong. So when he went to do the move, they get to the back, Hogan's like holding his neck and telling people, I'm never going to work with him again, my neck hurts, and was saying that his neck got broke, and all this other stuff. And Undertaker's like, Hogan was the big, the huge top star in the company. He's like, great. And he just started, what was it, the year before, I think? Yeah, the 1990 Survivor Series. So this was his first year in the company. And he's like, great, I just broke the neck of the top star. I'm going to be gone. He ended up seeing the actual footage later on and instantly became pissed, because it is clear he protected Hogan better than anybody he's ever protected. Hogan's head never even came close to hitting the mat. His neck didn't bend, nothing. Just like one of the first instances that Hogan proved what a freaking lying douchebag he is. I try to separate the real person from the wrestler when I'm talking about the match results and stuff, but with Hogan, I can't anymore. He's a lying piece of crap, bald, idiotic fraud. Anyway, moving on. That wasn't even the main event of the show. The main event was a 3-on-3 Survivor Series match. The Big Boss Man and the Legion of Doom teamed up to defeat the IRS and the Natural Disasters. The Legion of Doom were the survivors for their team. But a couple other title changes in this month that happened. November 24th, Ted DiBiase defeated $1 Million champion Virgil to win the title back. Of course, that was after Virgil was $1 Million Man's servant, and then he started treating him like crap, and he finally stood up for himself. I think it was Dusty Rhodes that helped Virgil stand up for himself finally. and ended up defeating Million Dollar Man for his $1 million title. Well, he won it back here, and if you don't know much about wrestling, the $1 million title was basically a title that was created for the $1 million Man. It wasn't an official championship, although he defended it. So how Virgil could win something that it wasn't official when I don't know. It's wrestling, okay? But November 5th, the Young Pistols, which was a team of Steve Armstrong and Tracy Smothers, rest in peace to Tracy Smothers, met him a few times at wrestling events. Super nice guy. He sat next to me one night selling merchandise and was just talking to me, how's your family? Never even talked to me before, but, he was, I was like 2 years into ring announcing. I was like a nobody, and he was a legend in the business, but he made me feel like I was, someone important, so definitely miss him. But him and Steve Armstrong were the Young Pistols. They defeated WCW U.S. Tag Team Champions, the Patriots, which was Todd Champion and Firebreaker Chip, an award-winning tag team there. But yeah, they actually had WCW U.S. Tag Team titles. That was part of the old Jim Crockett Promotions, which owned that company before Ted Turner bought them and turned them into WCW. They had like 3 different versions, if I remember correctly, of tag team titles, because they had so many wrestlers. Tag team wrestling was so important then. But and then November 20th, Disco Inferno debuted. Whoop-de-doo. And I'm sure the crowd was just as excited to see him that first day as they were his last match. Get him out of here, sorry. Disco Inferno's annoying. One of them ones that barely ever did anything, was hired to, and had big contracts for nothing, and I don't know. He just sucked. He was a crappy gimmick that if he was in the WWF, he wouldn't have lasted more than a month. But he must have been, I guess he was friends with Eric Bischoff or something, because I don't know how else he had a job for that long. Sucks. Anyway, a couple more things to talk about. The one movie that was released this month that I really liked was The Addams Family, the 1991 movie. Of course, my first dealing with The Addams Family was, of course, the 60s show, which I always maintain that I like the Munsters better than The Addams Family, but I still like The Addams Family. But this was the big box office movie that came out with Christopher Lloyd playing Uncle Fester. Well, at first he was playing the fraud, pretending to be Uncle Fester. That was like his adopted mother told him to pretend to be Uncle Fester to try to get the Addams Family fortune. It turns out at the end that it actually ended up being the real Uncle Fester. He just had amnesia. He was in the Bermuda Triangle, which that movie got me like terrified, like, because I'd heard like stories of people going missing in the Bermuda Triangle. So it's like Bermuda Triangle and like quicksand were those things from the 90s that you always heard of, like, oh no, you can't go near that. I guarantee if you went near quicksand, you could probably like easily pull your leg out. They made it seem like you barely touch it and you just disappear and die. But anyway, that was a really good movie. Of course, now they have all the other Addams Family stuff, and it's all popular again. But they had the cartoon too. But love that movie that was just one of those dark early 90s stuff that they really had kind of established. They had, of course, 1989 Batman, the really dark Batman, Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, all those, they're not all Tim Burton movies. The Addams Family's not, but they're all, you could all lump those in, I don't even know, gothic, not even horror, just fantasy, I don't know. I'm not good with figuring out labels of stuff. But the last thing we're going to take a look at is Saturday morning cartoon lineup from November 9th of 1991. I picked a random day, and it happens to be the second Saturday of the month. But we're going to take an actual look at the lineup, if I can get my mouse to work. There we go. This is November 9th, 1991. And this was back when there was 4 networks that were doing, this is before WB had a kids network. And I think this is the first year for Fox Kids. But we're going to start with ABC. They had The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which of course I'm not a big fan of Winnie the Pooh, but a lot of people are. 8:30, Land of the Lost, the 1991 series, which I absolutely love. Made my list for the Saturday morning shows and the Nickelodeon ones, because I first seen it on Nickelodeon. Darkwing Duck, I've watched a few episodes of that. I know a lot of people love that one. Speaking of Beetlejuice, the Beetlejuice cartoon, I actually prefer that to the movie. Crazy cartoon. 10 o'clock, Hammerman. I believe that was the MC Hammer cartoon. I never watched it, but just with a lot of them, like the movie tie-in cartoons, and even Jim Carrey at one time had 3 cartoons based on his movie characters going at once. He had, in the mid to late 90s, he had Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, and the Mask cartoons all going at once. But then we got the Pirates of Dark Water, which I seen an episode of this, not really paying attention, it was just on in the background. I was watching like a YouTube, they have the full blocks of cartoons from, back then you just put in a day and time, but you put in a day, or even just a month, and sometimes you'll come up with a full Saturday morning cartoon lineup, complete with commercials. It's pretty cool. But anyway, this was on there, and it wasn't my type of cartoon. And then we've got the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show. Can't go wrong with Looney Tune characters. At noon, something I never really watched at the time. I seen a few episodes, and I wasn't a huge fan of Ghostbusters, but it was Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters, and I know how you're not a fan of Ghostbusters. I didn't say I didn't like it, it's just I wasn't like a huge fan of it. Now move on to CBS. We got Muppet Babies, of course. They were right near the end of their show. Mother Goose and Grimm, which I don't remember watching, but I guarantee was a fairy tale type thing with the Mother Goose and the Brothers Grimm. We've got the season finale of Garfield and Friends, one of my favorite cartoons of all time. And the dogs are going crazy. They don't want to hear nothing about no cat. It's Garfield. It ain't Sweetie or Kitty. They don't care. It's a cat. They don't want to hear about it. But love Garfield and Friends. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We had an hour of Garfield and Friends. We had an hour of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Of course, the 1987 series is when that started. Classic. I'd seen some of the recent Turtles, and oh god, I can't even talk about it. They're so stupid looking. But then we've got Back to the Future, this cartoon series, which I've never watched. Where's Waldo? I never watched that cartoon. Of course, I've seen the Where's Waldo books, and I wasn't very good after the first 4 or 5 pages. I couldn't find him anymore. It gave me headaches looking. But I've never seen the cartoon, were they just looking for him the whole time, or is it just Waldo on adventures? I don't know. We got Riders in the Sky is the final one, and I've never even heard of that. Then we move to Fox. We've got Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which is a crazy cartoon based on a crazy movie. Then we got the original Fox Kids cartoon, Bobby's World, one of my favorites, Howie Mandel series. We got Tom and Jerry Kids, great cartoon there, of course. That's another trope in the cartoon world. You got the 50,000 Looney Tunes series, we got the movie tie-in series, and we've got the something kids, like Flintstone Kids, we got Tom and Jerry Kids. Then we got Tasmania, a crazy Taz character. A lot of Looney Tune characters, as you see. Then we got Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, never cared for the series or the movies. Then we got The Little Shop of Horrors, which was just called Little Shops, because it's for kids. I never watched that. Hey, and we got NBC back when they had cartoons on. We talked, I remember if it was last week or the week before, about when NBC switched from cartoons to teen shows, and it really ruined the network. But they still had cartoons in. Space Cats I've never heard of. Yo Yogi, which is Yogi Bear, they're trying to make it hip. It's Yo Yogi. Captain N in the new Super Mario World. I've seen the new Super Mario World, but I've never seen the Captain N portion. It's supposed to be like a Nintendo character, I don't know exactly what it is, but the N stood for Nintendo. Pro Stars, never heard of that. Wish Kids starring Macaulay Culkin. I've talked about that before, but I don't know exactly what it was. Did it have something to do with his Wishmaster movie? Did it have something to do with the Make-A-Wish kids? Was it just something else with Macaulay Culkin in it? I don't know. Macaulay Culkin was huge, though, at the time. Of course, Home Alone. Then we got Chip and Pepper's Cartoon Madness. Never heard of that. Saved by the Bell for an hour. The only good thing they had on the NBA teen shows. And then at noon, we got NBA Inside Stuff, which would become one of their main themes is basketball and teenagers. Blech. I didn't care about that even when I was a teenager. I wanted the cartoon stuff. One final thing, though, to talk about. I said that was the last one, but I got to talk about the TGIF shows that were going on at the time. Of course, the lead show, the one that came on at 8 o'clock, was the main show. It was Family Matters. They were in season 3. One of the episodes that came on this month was like Urkel created a robot in his image, which of course was like the first instance of that. And later on he'd go to clone himself and become Stefan and all this crazy stuff. That was the first instance of it where he made the Urkel robot. The second show was Step by Step, which was just starting in their first season, so they were a couple months in. The third show was Perfect Strangers. They were on season 7, so they were getting down to their last couple seasons. Of course, I never watched that show. I'd seen, a few clips here and there. But I do know that Harriet, the mom from Family Matters, was actually, and Carl too, well, the whole family basically, but they were spun off of Perfect Strangers. Harriet was like worked at the hotel as like, in the elevator. She either ran the elevator or something like that. But anyway, they had the episode they were going to do for the crossover. They had Carl on there, her husband, who was a cop in Chicago. But they spun that off into Family Matters, and it became huge. Step by Step was also, it wasn't a spin-off of Family Matters, but it was made by the same creators. In fact, in one of the very first episodes, Urkel's in Step by Step, kind of just giving him the like, here's Urkel from this show you really like. Now you got to watch this show now. But the final show was Baby Talk from season 2, which was a series based on the Look Who's Talking movies. It lasted 2 seasons, but it wasn't insanely popular, so it got canceled. But it was the same type of movie where they'd have a voice where the baby was talking. But that's going to be it for this week. A lot of good stuff going on there, especially with the music. Like I said, some of the greatest country music from the 90s came out just in this month alone as number ones. But next time we're on the podcast, we're actually going to go back a full year, almost 2 years, but just the year before. We're going to go back to February of 1990. This is the earliest I've done a podcast on. The last time I was in 1990 was episode 22. But this is the earliest that I've done one. Of course, whenever I do January, it can't get any earlier than that. It's the first month in the first year of the 90s. But this is the second month, so it'll be pretty close. Anyway, I was 6 years old at this time, living in Kentucky in a trailer park, and I've talked a little bit about this, but I'll talk about living with my brother's dad. One of my brothers. The other one's Marky Foe, you know about. This one is Joe, and I do not have any funny or nice stories about him like I do some with Marky Foe. At least I had fun with that abuse. Like later on, I still have no fond memories of Joe. But anyway, I was 6 years old in kindergarten. I haven't talked about me being in kindergarten before on here, so we're getting to the early days. But thanks for joining me. If you got any suggestions other than lower the microphone, because I ain't doing it. There's my face. You happy? I have a face. I'm like I'm just floating ahead with no bottom part of my face. But anyway, I don't even know why I'm wearing a stupid cowboy hat. There. Anyway, I have hair too, barely. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'll see you next time.
Tales from the 90s never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars.